my most humble salutations and heartfelt gratitude to our beloved Swami for being with us at this retreat. Sai Ram, brothers and sisters. That didn't sound very enthusiastic. Sai Ram. Wonderful. To the 47th Mid-Atlantic Regional Retreat. Welcome to our guest speakers and all of you for traveling from near and far to be here with us for this weekend. It's your energy and your enthusiasm that makes this retreat possible. Our theme for the retreat is attitude of gratitude. And leading up to the retreat, Swami filled us with so many beautiful experiences and Sai incidences that helped us live this theme. I would like to share one small such Sai incidents with you. There's many of them. If we keep talking, I think we'll be here forever. But as we were preparing for this retreat, safety was the top of our minds, right? With everything that's been going on, that was one thing that we were laser focused on. And we were putting together a list of all the supplies that we would need to make that possible. We had hundreds of wipes, several hundreds of sanitizers and masks, and as you can imagine, the list was endless. And then we were thinking, are we overdoing this? Are we overspending? All these thoughts kept going back and forth in our mind. And then I live in this small town called Secaucus, New Jersey. And our local mayor is a huge supporter of the Sai organization. He supports us on several service activities. We happened to mention about the retreat and about the planning for health and safety with one of the staff members in the mayor's office. And 2 days later, that person shows up at our doorstep with all the supplies that we needed for the retreat. Even without asking. And my heart was just overflowing with gratitude. This is just one little miracle that happened, but there's several of them for the altar setup, for food, anything that you can imagine. Everything fell in place with His grace. So with that gratitude, I would like to offer a collective bouquet of good habits. We started this sadhana program 34 days ago, leading up to the retreat on Aradhana Day. Each of us practiced one good habit every day. So on behalf of all of us, I would like to offer this collective bouquet of good habits to our beloved Swami at his lotus feet. I'm sure many of you have participated in the fireside chat last night. The speakers just warmed us up with the beautiful stories and inspiring, powerful messages. And that will continue throughout this weekend. So our first guest speaker for today is Brother Jonathan Roof. Brother Jonathan actually needs no introduction. He has been in Swami's fold since the 80s. He has served in the Sai organization in several capacities, including the national president role. He has written several books on Swami, the most famous being the series on Pathways to God. If you've done study circles, you must be very, very familiar with those books. So he will be sharing his inspiration and messages and experiences with Swami. Without further ado, please help me give a warm welcome to Brother Jonathan Roof.
Let's get this a little higher. A little higher. There we go. Yeah, that's good. No, I don't. Sai Ram, I offer my humble pranams at the divine lotus feet of Bhagavan Sri Satya Sai Baba. And it's so good to be here with all of you. You're my Sai family, and it's a wonderful to be here. Today, what I thought I would do is tell you about how I came to Swami this morning, and then I'm going to transition into our workshop material, which is actually going to be as much of a talk as a workshop. I want to talk about the mechanics of how you transform yourself, about the yogas of action, devotion, and wisdom. You know, Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita shows us that these are the three paths of self-transformation. And so I want to talk to you about that as part of our workshop. Somewhere along the line, we'll transition into that. It's not going to be a theoretical talk. It's going to be a talk about my experiences and how those experiences have changed me. I like to start the talk with a little story about a young man who's kind of like many of us, I suppose. He was very confused. This world is such a confusing place. We come into this world, and it's so hard to make sense of what is real and what is unreal. You know, when we buy a car or electronic equipment, we get an owner's manual. But when you're born, there's no owner's manual that comes along with you. And so we have to figure out what is real and what is unreal. And it's so confusing, especially in this Kali Yuga. You know, it's the age of untruth, and it's just so hard to find what's real and true in this lifetime. So this young man had these issues. He thought, is this all reality or is this a dream? His friends would tell him that life is Maya, that it's just illusion, that there is no reality, that you're born and you live and then you die. But it seemed to him that there was a reality to this life, that if you hit your head, you certainly feel it. We live a long time. So he was very confused. So he thought he would have to travel and find out the answer to this question. Is all of this reality or just a dream? So he first traveled down to Machu Picchu in South America and went up to the mountains expecting to find a holy shaman who could tell him, is this all reality or is it just a dream? But there were only tourists there and alpacas and rides. So he went off to Egypt. He thought, surely in the shadows of the great pyramids, there's got to be a wise person who can tell me, is this reality or is this just a dream? Is it all Maya or is there something real that we can grasp onto here that is real in our lifetimes? But in Egypt, he only found the camel rides and the souvenir shop. So he finally decided he would go off to India, and he went to Varanasi, and on the Ghats of the Ganges, he thought, surely if anyone can tell me if this is reality or just a dream, surely I will find a holy man here who can answer this question for me. So he went by the river, and he spotted a holy man sitting up on the steps, and he approached him reverentially and said, "Oh, great one, tell me, is all this reality or just a dream?" And the holy man kind of cocked his head and looked at him, and he said, "Well, that depends. Are you awake or are you asleep? Are you awake or are you asleep?" So we can go through life being asleep. We can go through life living the life of Maya, of pursuing wealth and education and families and big houses and fancy cars, or we can wake up to the reality. We can wake up to what is real and true in our lives. And that is so difficult to find. We spend lifetimes. But fortunately, Swami says, all the work you put in over lifetimes and lifetimes is never lost. And so we're always coming closer and closer to the goal. So this brings me to my story. I was something like this young man. I was confused, but I had the great good fortune of apparently coming into this lifetime with a lot of good karma, good fortune from past lifetimes. So I was born into a family that was very interested in spiritual matters. And so in a lot of ways, my story begins with my first trip to India in 1955. It was a long time ago. I was 2 years old. So my father and my mother were both very interested in spiritual teachings. It wasn't common in this country in the mid-1950s to pack up 3 kids under the age of 7 and move to India for more than 2 years. But my mother and father did just that. My father was planning to study with monks from the Ramakrishna mission up in the mountains. We spent most of the time in India near Kalimpong, up near the border with Bhutan and Sikkim. And my mother wasn't quite sure what she was going to do in India, but it turned out that she ended up studying Hatha Yoga. So both of them were very interested in finding a spiritual answer. And so I was certainly tagging along on this trip, and this was something of the beginning for me. My father did end up writing his book called Journeys on the Razor-Edged Path, and he had a lot of anecdotes from his time with the teachers from Ramakrishna Mission up there in the mountains near Darjeeling and Kalimpong. And my mother learned Hatha Yoga, which was not something common like it is now. Now you travel around the US and you see yoga classes everywhere, but no one really had any idea what this was when she started teaching yoga classes in about 1959. Indra Devi, who was a Swami devotee, was teaching yoga. Swami Vishnu Devananda up in Montreal area, but it was uncommon. And so over a period of time, she got a little bit of notoriety for teaching yoga. And in 1961, a best-selling book was written. An author by the name of Jess Stern wrote a book called Yoga, Youth, and Reincarnation. And it was a bestseller at that time, and it depicted my mother as something of a yoga guru. And so that launched her on a career of writing about and teaching yoga and reincarnation and astrology and such things. So I was along on this journey. As a young child in my family, we lived in Concord, Massachusetts, which incidentally is the home of what they call the Transcendentalists, Alcott and Emerson and Thoreau. Emerson and these people were actually studying the Bhagavad Gita in the late 1800s. It was unusual, and that was where Thoreau and Walden Pond was. So my mother was teaching yoga classes, so I was always surrounded by all of these strange people, Sybil Leek, the witch, and astrologers, and yoga classes were going on, but nothing really seemed to grip me about this. So as I got older into my teen years, I was really still looking. I had a good opportunity in my teen years, later teens, because my mother and by then second stepfather ran a metaphysical bookstore on the coast of Maine, up in York, Maine. So I worked summers in this metaphysical bookstore. So there was everything you could imagine there. You know, holy men, Ramana Maharshi and Ramakrishna. There was Theosophy. There was Zen Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism. Anything you can think of that would be, you know, in a metaphysical bookstore. Books about religion. So I had access to all of these books and was reading all of these books. But still, nothing really quite ever really got my attention fully. I particularly liked Ramakrishna and Ramana Maharshi and the Zen Buddhism, but never really found a path. I was still looking to see what is the reality of this. So I went off to college, at Claremont in California in 1971, and I was kind of at loose ends. I had access to all of these spiritual teachings, but yet I hadn't really found something that caught my heart. And so I thought maybe I'd be a psychology major. I thought maybe the answers are in psychology rather than in all of these esoteric teachings. So I was going to be a psychology major when something happened that changed my life in 1971. I was a freshman in college, and I was in my dormitory room one afternoon, and I had just resolved that I was going to engage in a service project. The college had a project where they would take a group of students into the city of Pomona, California, and they would work in a mental hospital, which was a rather severe case mental hospital. And I decided, well, maybe this transformation really does require something of service. And just as I resolved to do that project, I had my hand on the light switch, and I flicked the light switch, and in an instant, just everything changed in my consciousness. In an instant, it was as though all the worries and fears dropped from my shoulders. It was as though in an instant I was seeing everything for the first time. It was as though time had stopped. In an instant, everything shifted from outside to inside and from head to heart. And I was just amazed. How could this be? How can our consciousness transform in an instant like that? And I looked around the room, and I wandered out into the corridor, and I was looking around as though I were seeing things for the very first time. But the experience lasted at that time for about 2 or 3 minutes. It wasn't long at all, but it was long enough that I knew the reality of this spiritual path. I knew the reality that what it said in those books about Zen Buddhism, about the possibility of a sudden awakening, that is a reality. That is a very real reality. And so I changed my major back to religion and started studying Hinduism and Buddhism. But one thing that I forgot at that time is I forgot what I was doing when I had the experience. I forgot that when I flicked that light switch that I had just resolved to do a service activity. And so after I had that experience, I was reading a lot of Zen Buddhist books and trying to get that experience back, but I had forgotten what the catalyst was, that I had decided to do service. And this is where this topic is going to come in, the mechanics of self-transformation. Study, service, and devotion. That's how we transform ourselves. And I'm going to give you a number of stories about that a little later, and we'll transition at some point into the workshop side of things, and we'll open it up for questions. But at this point, I was in college. I'd had this experience. I was trying to get this experience back by any means, but it was as though I had hit a wall. It was as though I'd hit a wall that I couldn't get around, I couldn't get over, under. For some reason, I just couldn't get that experience back, and I didn't know exactly what was happening. I'd graduated from college and got a job. I was a religion major in college, so what do you do as a religion major? Well, I got a job as a stockbroker. They pray a lot. Anyway, I was married after I got out of college, had a home, so started on life in the world, and yet every day this was still my major thought. You know, I've got to find some way to get this experience back again. And it was at that time, you know, once we've done everything we can do, we become eligible for divine grace. And that's when divine grace entered entered my life. My mother had moved to California and was living. Bob and Barbara Bazzani for a while moved to Arizona. I was living with my wife in Tucson, Arizona, and Bob and Barbara Bazzani in 1978 were living in Paradise Valley, Arizona, up in the Phoenix area. So my mother called me and said, well, I'm going to be up visiting the Bazzanis in Paradise Valley. Why don't you come up and visit? And I was far enough away from where my mother lived that I didn't see her that often. So my wife and I went up to Paradise Valley to visit, and we had a nice visit with the Bazzanis and my mother. No one really said anything about Swami too much. But when I left, when we were just getting ready to go, my mother handed me 2 books, Murphat's Sai Baba Avatar and Holy Man and the Psychiatrist. And I thought, well, you know, what's my mother into now? She was always kind of on the leading edge. She was always ahead of everyone else. You know, she was teaching yoga in 1959. So she was always out there a little bit, teaching about and writing about reincarnation and astrology. So I didn't really know what to make of the fact that she had given me these 2 books. But on the other hand, I had a little bit of a history. I loved Ramakrishna and Ramana Maharshi, and I'd actually read a book about Shirdi Sai Baba, so I like those kinds of things. So I finally got around to reading these books, and the Sai Baba Avatar book by Murphat particularly struck a strain in my heart that I was always a very intellectual person, but this somehow affected me. So I started reading this book. There's a story in the book about how Murphat is thinking about Swami. He's in Chennai, and he's in a like a tent with mosquito netting that's all sealed up. And he woke up one morning, and there was a holy leaf, like a tulsi leaf, inside his tent, inside the screen, and that struck me, that story. So I was thinking about this story, and my wife and I drove up to the White Mountains of Arizona. We went through New Mexico and the Gila Cliff dwellings, and all this time I was thinking, what is this Sai Baba? Who is this? What is it that touches my heart about this? And so we got up into the White Mountains at Alpine at about 10,000 feet one evening and got to this motel room. And it was kind of interesting because it had orange carpet and orange bedspread and orange curtains. And that entire night, the only thing that would go through my mind was Om Sai Baba, Om Sai Baba. And so that's all I remember all night. In the morning, I got up, opened the door. This was at 10,000 feet in November, and there was a fresh snow all over everything. You know how quiet it is when there's a fresh snow and you open the door for the first time? November 23rd, 1978. Swami says, when he's born in your heart is your birthday. So that was kind of the start of it. So we got back to our home in Tucson, and I was very much captured by this story about this Sai Baba. You know, I had read everything. I was intellectual and had read all the Zen Buddhism, all these other teachers. But what was it about this that captured me? I didn't really know. But I took out a picture from Murphat's book, Sai Baba Avatar. It's a picture I learned later that was taken during Shiva Ratri. Swami's kind of meditating in this picture. And I pulled this picture out of the book and put it in a little inexpensive plastic frame on my desk. And after a couple of days, I noticed that there were little sprinkles of this holy ash on the face of this picture. And my wife noticed it also, and she sampled it. It wasn't incense in to see Sai Baba. You know, how would he know who I am and where we had taken the vibhuti off the frame. I decided I'd get a new picture of Baba, a smiling Baba, and so I put it in the frame. But after about a week or so, I gave that away to a friend. So I had the original picture, and I said, well, why don't I put this picture in a new frame? So I got a nice gold-colored frame, and I got some green mat board and some non-glim with me, and I brushed it off a number of times. I put the picture right down beside me, and I turned and cut out a piece of mat board, and I looked right back at the picture. There was a loose pile of this holy ash on the picture. This loose ash rolls off into my hand. So how could that be? You know, how can God respond in such a way? You know, how does he know? You know, he's not standing on some great Mount Olympus with a giant telescope looking at all of us. He's in our hearts. You know, Bhagavan is indweller in the heart, and so he knows. And the fact that not only he knows, but that he can respond, that he can address, you know, your doubts and your devotion, was amazing to me. That I could receive this kind of response. So I told my wife about that, Rose. I told her about how this ash had rolled off into my hand, and she said, "Oh, well, that's nice. If he sends us a personal invitation, maybe we should go visit him." Well, that's a strange thing to say. Why would Sai Baba send us a personal invitation? You know, as if that wasn't a personal invitation. But she said, well, if he sends us a personal invitation, we should go visit him. And I think she might have said that because she really didn't want to go back to India. When we were in college, we did a semester abroad in Nepal, and we traveled back up to Kalimpong and Darjeeling after we were in Nepal for 5 months. And then we went around and went up to Kashmir, and we were kind of young and hippies. You wouldn't recognize me then. I had hair down to my shoulders and a beard and mustache and so forth. And so we did it kind of low budget, which is not a good way to do India. So I think she didn't really want to go back. So that left a pretty good obstacle if he sends us a personal invitation. How is someone on the other side of the world going to send you a personal invitation, someone who you've never met? Well, about the same time, my mother, who had given me the books, was thinking that she would go to India and see Sai Baba. And so she was starting to put together the idea of taking a group. And she put together a nice travel flyer. You used to have to typeset them back in those days. It was a big process. And so she put together a nice travel flyer to recruit people for her group. And she sent us a copy of this flyer. And it said, right up at the top, it said, "This is your personal invitation to go visit Satya Sai Baba in India." Well, that's a little bit unusual, isn't it? This is your personal invitation to go visit Satya Sai Baba in India. But we were young at the time. I was just 25 years old. This was 1978. And, you know, we had a new house, and, you know, I was in real estate at the time, and I wasn't very good at it. And so I really didn't have the time because I was trying to get better at it. And, you know, when you're not good at something, you should apply yourself. And I didn't have the money, really, also, because I wasn't good at it. So there was this problem, you know, we didn't really have the time, didn't really have the money, although we did have the personal invitation. But Swami has a way of making things happen. As I said, I was working in real estate, and my broker called me one day and talked to me and said, "John, I have this client. Why don't you go out and take a look at this piece of commercial real estate up by the interstate, and you know, he might be interested in making an offer on this piece of real estate. So quickly, this deal came together, and wrote up the contract. And within about a few weeks to a month, the deal went through, and the broker handed me a check for $10,500, which was a lot of money in 1978. He handed me a check and said, "John, you're fired." So I had the time and I had the money. He did give me he did offer the job back when I got back, but he said later he wanted to get my attention and kind of give me a kick in the butt, I guess. So he said, "You're fired." But I had the time and I had the money. And so we went off to India, and I think we got there in January of 1979. And went to Whitefield and to Prasanthi Nilayam. When we got to Prasanthi Nilayam, we had an interview with a group of people, and Swami allowed people to ask some questions. My wife asked what had happened to my mother, who had disappeared at that time. It was a mysterious disappearance. Swami said, "Yeah, who is mother?" The only thing I was interested in asking Swami was that experience I had when I was in college, 1971. I was 18 years old. Is that what I'm trying to make my everyday experience? And he said, yes. I knew that was the case, but what else was I going to ask him? What else had any importance for me? Every day, and particularly after I knew about Swami, you know, my only thought was, how do I get that experience back again? You know, I had studied the Zen Buddhism, and I was a religion major in college, and had done all the study, but I had forgotten what the catalyst was when I flipped that switch, that I had resolved to do the service activity. And, you know, I'm not a great savak, but when I learned about Baba, my life was transformed. There wasn't anything I wouldn't do to further this mission. So within about a month or two, I was a center president. Over the next 33 years, I was a regional vice president for 2 terms. I was a regional president for 2 terms. I was national Central Council president for the last 10 years. Swami was in the forum 2001 to 2011. We used to organize retreats all the time. I would go to bhajans, you know, every Thursday, do study circle, every Sunday, service activities on Sundays. You know, my life became, I didn't think of it as service, but it became definitely a path of action, a path of karma. And that's really, I think, what the catalyst was when I had decided to do that service project at the mental hospital in 1971. So this was a catalyst that apparently set off a transformation. In 1987, I had been involved with the Sai program for 9 years at that time, and had been very much involved. This was actually before the first Pathways, the Pathways to God first volume even came out. I'm going to tell that story as we transition into the path of action. But it was only 9 years. The book wasn't even out. But in 1987, my wife and I went to India, and Swami was in Whitefield. And so we were staying at the Taj Hotel in Bangalore, and traveling out by taxi to the ashram at Whitefield a couple of times a day. And January 30th, 1987, we had gotten back from darshan in the afternoon, and that evening we went and had some Chinese food at the restaurant down below. About 7 o'clock, I went down to the lobby, and got a book at the bookstore. It turned out it was a Ramana Maharshi book, and brought that book back up to the room number 812, and at about 10 minutes past 7, I was thumbing through this book and just reading a paragraph. I don't know what the quotation was, but in an instant, this experience comes back again that I had asked Swami for every day, that I had desired every day since I was 18 years old. Swami, grant me that liberation, grant this moksha, this transformation of consciousness. And in an instant, it came back. Again, it was as though time stopped. It was as though I was seeing everything for the first time. It was as though the colors were brighter and more vivid, as though I had more energy. I think the experience is actually something that happens in connection with opening the heart chakra. Swami, most people think of the experience of illumination as being ajna chakra or a crown chakra or something, but it's really a heart chakra event. And in an instant, everything shifted from outside to inside. I no longer saw that there was anything that I required outside of myself, and it shifted from head to heart. I had always been very much an intellectual person, and I thought the goal was all about just understanding. Just understanding. If you had the right idea, the right knowledge, then that was all you really needed. But I grew up in the 60s and early 70s, and that was when the Beatles went to Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, and it was a time when psychedelics were the big thing, and people thought that if you were just in the right state of mind, that's all that needed to happen. But really, the transformation is a transformation of the heart, and it comes about through this study, the service, and the devotion. So this experience comes back again, and one of the most amazing things was that every day, my constant thought almost was, Swami, grant liberation. In an instant, all desire disappears. All desire disappears, and even the thought disappears. In an instant, there's clarity and there's calmness, and the agitations, the worries, fears of the mind disappear, and you're left in a state of realizing what is Authmic consciousness. We're going to talk when we get to the point about the path of wisdom about how to distinguish between Authmic consciousness and everyday consciousness, and how the two relate, because it's actually a difficult question, because people expect to find perfection in body, mind, personality. They expect to find perfection in like some kind of sainthood, but the perfection lies in Atma. It lies in higher consciousness. The perfection of Atma runs concurrently with the imperfections of the daily life. So they're like train tracks; they run concurrently. But we'll get to that. But just the point is that the perfection and the imperfection both exist at the same time. It's an important thing. So I was concerned about this experience because the first time I'd had it in 1981, it had only lasted a couple of minutes. It didn't last at all. So I was thinking, well, what do? I don't want to think about it too much, because I don't want to get involved with ego and the mind, because that's the problem. The whole problem with spiritual life is overcoming ego, desire, lower mind. They're all synonymous: manas, lower mind, ego, desire. It's what keeps us from experiencing the higher consciousness. We have lower mind, we have buddhi, higher mind, and then we have Authmic consciousness. Authmic consciousness has no qualification. It's not related to ego, to the external. Well, we'll talk more of that. So I didn't want to get involved with ego and see this disappear again. So I tried to just experience it in my heart and feel what that felt like and retain that feeling. And so the minutes turned into hours, and the hours turned into days and months, and now that's been 35 years ago, and it's still there. So I've had a chance to observe what this means and to see the deepening of this experience and to see the relationship of how do you get there? You know, is this reality or just a dream? There is very definitely the reality that Swami showed me, that he is omnipresent, that he is always there, and that God is the indweller in all things. There's also the reality of the higher mind, of that same God is within us. That same God is inseparable from us. My mother used to have something in her study room which I found very interesting and thought-provoking. She had a blue globe. It wasn't like it didn't have pictures of continents on it or anything like that. It had outlines of constellations of the stars, and it had a little cord coming out and pinholes in it. And what would happen is you would put it in a darkened room, and you would turn on the light inside, and it would project the stars on the walls and on the ceiling. It was a little planetarium. And I thought that was very interesting, and it's an example of the way the divine works, because God is like that light in the center of this globe, this planetarium. We think we are the stars that are projected by this light on the walls and ceilings of the darkened room. You know, we think we're all separate. We're different sizes and colors and shapes depending on where the light has fallen, but it's all projected by the same light. Swami says, one Atma, one God, one light. The only thing that separates us is shadow, the shadow of that globe. But we are like the stars, but you know, it's an explanation of why Swami sees my devotion and manifests this holy ash on this picture. There's no separation between man and God. That little planetarium is the perfect illustration of the Mahavakya, Atman is Brahman. The truth of the individual is no different than the divine universal truth. To taste a drop of the ocean is to taste the entire ocean. And so this is the lesson, and this is, you know, what we're coming through the paths of study, of service, and devotion. So I'm going to start to talk a little bit more about the path of action and tell you some of my experiences relating to what happened with the books. There's different experiences and lessons to be learned with each of the books. As I said, you know, you shouldn't feel that this is an impossible task. Atma is within everyone all the time. It's always within you. It's your very life force. It's that consciousness that is Sat Chit Ananda, truth, consciousness, bliss. There's no way you can describe it. It is not related to body, mind, personality, but is perfect in itself. It's like the silence in a room. You don't hear it. You know, your teenage son or son might be in the next room playing the drums. You know, there was silence in the room, but you just can't hear it because of the drumming going on next door. That's a sound of ego, of desire. But Atma is always there and always available. So So this experience in 1987 came back. It was only 9 years after I had first heard about Swami. I certainly understand that I probably brought some favorable karma into this life, but the message too is that this is by no means an impossible task. People worry about this pursuit. They think that if they experience illumination, that they will somehow lose their self-identity or something like that. There's all kinds of unreasonable fears, but it's just an awareness of the divine within you. There's nothing to be feared that you will in any way lose your identity, or it's a consciousness above the lower mental level, but that doesn't mean you don't know who you are or what you're doing. So, but anyway, so let's talk a little bit about how to get there. Well, I certainly found that the path of action was necessary. We all have karma to overcome from past lifetimes, and the chief way of getting past karma is with action in this lifetime. We have to act for everything we do. We have to work for food and clothing. We have a job to do. Why should spiritual life be any different? God has granted us all these things, the air and the water and food, but there's still some work for us to do. There's some karma to be done to earn the grace of God, to see God in everyone. All three paths, the path of action, the path of devotion, the path of wisdom, all of them are aimed at overcoming lower mind, overcoming desire, overcoming ego and selfishness. So anyway, so people would come to the center when I first got there in 1978, 79, and they would say, I like the stories about Swami, these miracles, and there were lots of books of quotations, but there really weren't any books that just summarized Swami's teachings. So I thought, well, why don't we write a book? I mean, if there's not a book, whatever the need is, you should feel that you can fulfill that need. Whatever is required, there's no reason why you can't do that. So I started writing this first Pathways to God volume. It wasn't called that originally, but so I spent about 3.5 years, and I was working at a bank at the time, so I would have to go to the bank at maybe 8 in the morning, so I'd get up about 5 or 5:30 in the morning and work for an hour or hour and a half in the mornings and read quotations. I would pick out the topics, and I had to read everything that Swami wrote, all the Vahinis and Satyasai Speaks and Summer Showers to get the quotations, and then finally started weaving it all together. So it took about 3.5 years to do that, working pretty steadily. And the book was pretty much done by about 1984. And there wasn't really any way to get books published at that time. There wasn't really a mechanism for it. Elsie Cowan at the Satyasai Book Center in Tustin was publishing some books, and I spoke with her, and she was interested in looking into publishing the manuscript. But that was right when Elsie Cowan passed away in the mid-1980s. So her assistant, Walt Neubauer, well, he started taking a look at the book and was thinking that he would maybe work on publishing this. And that was when Walt Neubauer passed away. So by 1991, when Jack Scher at Leela Press started soliciting manuscripts, and I sent it to him, and he expressed an interest in doing it, I immediately worried for his health. But as it turned out, he was fine. So he started getting the manuscript all ready, prepared, and he started printing it out on photocopy-ready paper, which he used to have to do back then. Meanwhile, I had gotten all the approvals on this book from everyone in the organization, but finally Dr. Goldstein said, I think this was about 1991 or so. He said, I'll take the book to Swami and get an official approval. So Goldstein was reading through the manuscript on his way to India, and when he got to India, he told Swami what was in the book, and he had one question about one thing, though. It used to be that within the Sai organization that Swami approved all the office holders above the center president level, and I had put that in the book, and Goldstein was questioning that because it was pretty much a full 10 years between the time I started and the time the book was actually published. So he mentioned that to Swami, and Swami said, that's fine, change that, but it's approved. But meanwhile, back in Virginia, Jack Scher had been printing out the manuscript. He thought, Swami's not going to change anything on this. I'll just go ahead and get it ready. But he was printing, and he got to page 9 on the book, and his computer stopped, and it printed a computer command. It said Baba quote. He had a macro that he was using to italicize the quotations. And so he would use this. It's a computer command like a indent or paragraph. It's not something that prints, but it got to page 9 and it stopped and it said Baba quote. Well, so he didn't know what to do about this. So he thought, well, I'll just wait and find out what's going on. Meanwhile, Goldstein comes back from India and he says, well, Swami has approved the book, but you need to make a little change here on the chapter about the organization. He said he had read a very good Baba quote that Ann Sohani in New York had for a retreat flyer. So he called me and said, well, why don't you get this Baba quote? And it would be appropriate. It was a quotation about individuals being able to express their own divinity. And so I called Ann Sohani and got this Baba quote and rewrote about 6 paragraphs. And as it turned out, this Baba quote and the new material I sent to Jack Scher in Virginia Beach, where his computer stopped, it went in page and paragraph on page 9, where his computer stopped and said Baba quote. That is Swami dealing with a lot of different people. It's kind of an unusual that he's dealing with computers and people thousands of miles apart, and yet he has he weaves all of this together in such a way. So if you think Swami doesn't pay attention to service or to what you're doing, Swami is intensely aware and very much capable of managing events at a distance. The second book was a little bit different. I started getting into a phase where things were maybe a little bit different and a little bit more difficult. Sometimes we have to power through. It did take 10 years to get the first book published. I thought with the second one, maybe it would go easier. And so after the first one was done, I thought, well, I'll start work on the second one. So I started on a chapter. I pulled together a number of chapters, and I thought it was important that people understand the basis of Vedanta. They think that spirituality, comes from, Zen Buddhism or something, but the Vedas are so ancient. Swami told a group of devotees in an interview in 1978, Christmas Eve, that the time of Rama was 20,000 years ago. And it was during the time of Rama, 20,000 years ago, that many of the sages were first hearing the Vedas said. Swami said that the sages Vasishta in Rama's court, Agastya, Vamadeva, Visvamitra, these were the sages who were hearing the Vedas. They're called Shruti, that's which is heard. And so this was when the Vedas were coming about. It's the time of when the Upanishads were being written down. We know that that Sita was the foster child of King Janaka, and she was, recovered from the earth, and so Janaka was her father, and of course Rama became her husband. But in the court of King Janaka, that's where a lot of the Upanishad stories take place. Janaka used to have these meetings where sages would come and discuss the nature of what is real and what is reality of the Atma. So all of this was coming about at that time. Okay, so I lost my train of thought a little bit. What I was getting to was the second book, and sometimes things can be difficult. So I was working on chapters on the Vedas because I thought it was important that people understand the Vedas, where they came from, the Upanishads, the Puranas. We need to understand the history of the thought we understand. So I sent Judy Scher, the editor, the first chapter on the Vedas, and she had her readers read it, Al Drucker and some other people, and they just didn't like it at all. They weren't interested. So I thought, wow, that's kind of too bad. I've already spent all this time, working on this chapter, and we have the Vedas, and it seems to me that this stuff is important, but they had no interest in pursuing it. So I said to myself, Swami, I'm not doing this for me. If you want me to finish this book, you need to appear in my dreams tonight. Well, that's pretty audacious, isn't it? But that's what I said. Swami, you want me to finish this book? You need to appear in my dreams tonight. Swami usually does not appear on demand, as far as I've experienced. But nonetheless, that evening, Swami did appear in my dreams. I had a dream, and through the magic of the dream, I was in front of a big, football stadium, like the Rose Bowl. And Swami was up in the very top rows of this big, huge stadium. And I was standing outside with my daughter, who was 14 years old at the time. And so I didn't know quite what to make of that. But in retrospect, I think the meaning of that dream was that, yes, there is an audience, but they just haven't showed up yet. Because this was back in about 91, and later the young adults and others showed more interest in understanding the Vedas and so forth. The book didn't actually get published, I think, until my daughter turned 21. So, but this book was a little bit of a challenge because I had to do my own editing on that one and the third one. So. I worked another 3.5 years on that, also doing all the reading all Satyasai Speaks and Vahinis and Summer Showers and all the Sanatana Sardis for quotations, and then putting together the book. But when I took the manuscript to India for Swami, it was a time when he was ignoring me. So I was in Vrindavan, and I had this manuscript. It was the last day of my trip, and Swami was ignoring me. To properly ignore you, you have to be put in the front row. There's no use ignoring someone who's in the back row. So to properly ignore me, Swami put me in the front row, and he came along the darshan line, and he talked to the person on my left. He circled around and talked to the person on my right, and I think it was Mike Congleton, and went on. But as he was going by, he put his hand on the manuscript, on the book. So I did, you know, complete that, obviously, and I think it's an important book and for a specific audience. But the point of this story is that things aren't always easy on the path of karma, on the path of practice. We sometimes have, well, we're really engaged in activity to overcome our obstacles, to overcome our past karma, and so you should really kind of expect things to be a little difficult. Hopefully not as difficult as the experience of the archer Ekalavya. I don't know if you know that story from the Mahabharata. Ekalavya, I think I'm pronouncing that right. You can correct me if I'm wrong. But he was a young prince, but he had been given up by his royal parents and adopted by a lower caste tribe. And he was very intent on being an archer. He lived at the time of Arjuna and Drona, and he took Drona as his guru. But Drona would not accept him because Drona's school for martial arts and archery was open only really to the princes of the royal families. Besides which, this Ekalavya was a Nishada tribe. He was lower caste, and apparently that tribe was often at odds with the Kurus. So he didn't really want to train someone who might be on the other side of the battlefield, you know, when they showed up. So Drona said, "No, you're not my disciple." But Ekalavya was one-minded, and he actually crafted a clay statue of Drona, which he would worship every day. And it came to be that Drona heard about this, and he went out with some of his disciples to see this fellow. And he said, "Well, I didn't give you permission. I didn't say you could be my disciple." But here Ekalavya was worshiping the guru anyway. And so Drona said, "Well, if you're my disciple, you owe me the gift to the guru dakshina. Is that correct?" And Ekalavya said, "Yes." And so Drona said, "Okay, I want your right thumb." That's a sacrifice for an archer, someone who was a rival of Arjuna, but Ekalavya gave him his right thumb. So the question is, how prepared are we to move forward? How prepared are we to meet any obstacle, to find the God within ourselves, to find the motivation within ourselves, to move forward, to do what needs to be done. If there's a book that needs to be written, write it. If there's songs that need to be sung, sing them. If there's work that needs to be done in the canteen, do it. If, you know, all of us have the capability of manifesting God in our own ways, and we should have a vision. We should have a commitment to do it and to find the divinity within ourselves to do it, regardless of the obstacles. You know, the shares might have said they weren't interested in this book. The readers may not have liked it, but Swami liked it. Swami wanted it done. He had his approval, and he gave me the dream. And I think it's a benefit to many people. The greatest compliment I ever got on that second volume was I got a message from Prashante Nilayam at one time, and there was a local gentleman who was asking for permission to translate the chapter on the Vedas into local Indian languages. And so I thought that was a high compliment. It's not only what Swami says, but it's also academically correct. I was a religion major, and so it's very difficult to find good information on origin and meaning of the Vedas, and so you can find it there. So that was the second book. I thought we could maybe get into the story on the third book here before we end. How am I doing on time? Pretty good, I guess. 10 minutes. Okay, that's about time for the third book. The third book was interesting. in 2002, Michael Goldstein, it might have been a little bit before, probably 2002, Michael Goldstein called me and said, there's going to be a service conference in Prasanthi Nilayam in 2002. Why don't you go and do a talk? And I thought, well, I'm not no great savak. I mean, I don't see myself as any kind of great karma yogi or anything. I wouldn't normally go to a service conference, but the theme of the conference was SAI, S-A-I, Service, Adoration, Illumination. Again, study, service, devotion. And Goldstein asked me to give a talk on the subject of illumination. And so, of course, I went. I've never said no to Swami. And but during this conference, on July 23rd, 2002, in the morning, had gone for darshan, and Swami had given a discourse in the morning. And after the discourse, I'd gotten up. Swami was going to do his valedictory discourse in the afternoon, but I headed back to my room in roundhouse number 1, and I got as far as the Ganesha garden, right where the big Ganesha statue is, and all of a sudden I knew exactly what Swami wanted me to do. I knew that Swami wanted me to do the third book on self-realization. The third Pathways to God is all on self-realization, and if you haven't read it, you really should. If I do say so myself, it's a great book, and Ganesha himself facilitated this thing. It's half again longer than the first 2 books, but it only took half the time to do it. Ganesha removed all the obstacles. Not only is there much more reading and quotations, not only from Swami, but all the modern and ancient teachers on the subject of self-realization. And anyway, so I had the idea, I got to the Ganesha garden and had the idea that I should do this book as a very strong feeling. I thought, well, that's unusual. I hadn't really planned on writing the book. I thought I would put it off until I got old and wise. But actually it was a good thing I did it then, because instead of getting old and wise, I got old and lazy. But anyway, so I had this idea that this is what I was supposed to do. So I went back up to Roundhouse, R1C1, we are one and we should see one. And my wife was up there. And I said, I know exactly what Swami wants me to do. And she said, yeah, I know exactly what Swami wants me to do too. She had had the inspiration of what she was supposed to be doing at work. And that was very strange, that we would talk to each other that way. I know what Swami wants me to do. So I kind of let it drop. And then in the afternoon, we went to the darshan. And Swami again gave a nice discourse, the Valedictory Discourse for the service conference, and it was a nice talk, but it struck me that Swami really didn't give much of a valedictory message, because the day before, on the 22nd, he had said, tomorrow I'm going to tell you all exactly what to do. So the valedictory discourse came out, and we were kind of waiting to see, well, what is Swami going to tell us to do? Is there going to be some organizational pronouncement that you should, feed the hungry and serve the needy and, do this or that? Is there going to be some announcement, or why didn't Swami in his valedictory discourse tell us what to do? Because he said the day before very clearly, I asked a number of people, you heard that. He said, tomorrow I'm going to tell you all exactly what to do. So like a thick-headed person, it wasn't until that evening when I was sitting on my cot thinking about the day that I realized, well, Swami did tell us exactly what to do, but it wasn't an organizational pronouncement. It was directly to the heart. So the next day I went out and I talked to people there at the conference. what did Swami tell you to do yesterday? I think everyone I talked to had a message of what Swami wanted them to do, but it wasn't a command. It wasn't something in writing, something from the organization. It was from the heart. And from the heart, you can accept it or not. But if you want transformation, you should accept what Swami wants of you. That's how you really transform, when you take up the challenges. So all the people I talked to had a similar message. You know, I talked to B. Flagg about that. I mentioned it at one time, and she said, yeah, the same thing used to happen when she went to educational conferences. Swami would say, I will answer all your questions. But there was never, more than a few questions, during the question and answer period. But at the end of the conference, everyone's questions were answered. So Swami has this capacity to tell you what to do within your own heart, but it's still up to you to take up the challenge. You have to hear the message, you have to accept the challenge, and if you accept that challenge, it's transformative. It's absolutely transformative. So that's the message of the path of action. We've got to have the inspiration, we've got to follow through, we've got to follow through even when things seem difficult. The second and third books I had to do my own editing on, but I work directly with the trust. You don't need anyone else. You can find a way to make things happen. So I'm probably just about out of time. 5. Well, I think what I'll say is in the workshop time this afternoon, we'll talk about the path of devotion and the path of wisdom. I want to tell you my experiences on the path of devotion, a little bit more of the direct experience of Swami in my heart. And I want to tell you more about the path of wisdom, because it's very important that you understand the nature of Atma, of higher consciousness, and where all this fits in. Swami's program of study, service, and devotion is not a smorgasbord. It's not, I'll take some of that and maybe some of that. If you want transformation, you need to follow all the paths. You need to do the study, you need to do the service, and you need to do the devotion. None of them work without the others. If you serve but you don't know that you're serving God in other people, if you don't have the devotion that you're serving God, if you don't have the wisdom to know what you're serving and why you're serving, then service is hollow. It's only a show. If you think you have devotion to God, but it never expresses itself in service, and you don't have the wisdom to know what it is God asks from you, what God looks like, how you experience God, then you won't move either. Similarly, you need to have the knowledge. Many people actually come to a kind of a recognition of Atma consciousness, but they don't understand it, and they're confused by it, and they don't know where it fits in. And so you need to understand that and how that fits in with knowledge of God. Buddhism, the experience of Buddha, the self-realization, he never said that there was or was not a divine being. The experience of self-realization, the experience of overcoming ego, realizing Atma consciousness, does not depend on your relationship with God specifically. So that's another thing I want to talk about. So we'll do those in the workshop, and I'll try and open it up to questions for the workshop. So I want to hear all of your questions on service, devotion, and also on the path of wisdom. And I hope this has been helpful for you, and I will see you at that afternoon workshop. Sai Ram, thank you.
My humble salutations at the divine lotus feet of dear Bhagavan. Saram, everyone. Wow. Brother Jonathan, I have no words how to express my joy listening to you. How about one more round of applause for Brother Jonathan? Personally, this has been so blissful for me, and it's a great honor finally to meet you and shake hands with you, and even more so to listen to you in person. Your books, Pathways to God, has been transforming devotees all over the world through study circle. It's one of the best study circle materials available on Swami's teachings. And in our Sai Center, we use this book for study circles all the time. And I'm proud to say that it played a very important role in my own journey so far. So thank you for that as well. I had so many key takeaways from this, so many gems that I would like to take away from your talk. But you know, the most important or most, the eye-catching or ear-catching aspect that you talked about for me personally was about the path of seva, path of service, path of work, how to reach Swami through the path of action, and how Swami used these books to take you through that journey or through your pathway to God. And I'm also, thinking about in similar lines. You said, no matter what, make it happen, right? So, I mean, there was a small incident, and when you mentioned Ekalavya, I was actually chuckling because a few days ago there was an incident that happened. We were working on something for the retreat, and something heavy fell on my finger, and blood started oozing out. And my Sai friends around me, we all thought I lost my finger. And, but to our amazement, it was just when the blood was gone, the finger was intact, and by Swami's grace, in 2 days it healed, and I was able to continue my work. So, and then at that time, one of my friends who was there joked very jovially was mentioning, oh, without the finger, you can still work like an Ekalavya. So I was remembering that. So the key, what do you call, the message here is, no matter what happens, keep working for Swami's mission, and that work will take you to your transformation or your pathway to God. Thank you, Brother Jonathan, and we look forward to listening to you again during the workshops. Sai Ram.